All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode one of TechPoutine. On the call, we have Eleonore Jarry, Gabriel Sundaram, and Ian Jeffrey, and myself, Nectarios Economakis. I guess a bunch of friends that wanted to get together and record a podcast a few months in the making. Good timing this week. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about FounderFuel, but maybe we want to talk about first as to why we're doing this. If you're listening, we're four people that work in the Canadian tech ecosystem for a large part of our careers, and just wanted to shoot the shit and talk about tech, talk about news. I guess the first thing is just who are we? So maybe I'll kick it off with Eleanor. So if you want to just maybe brief intro, if that's okay.
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Eleanor. I'm a partner at Bright Spark Ventures. We're an early stage VC firm. And I got involved in the Montreal tech ecosystem by building French Ventures, a student run VC firm. So I started when I was in university, wanted to support the local student tech founders by providing specialized capital to them. Sounded like a crazy idea. A lot of people told me I was completely crazy trying to build this. And then Real Ventures kind of supported us. And quickly now, we gathered a lot of the support from the Montreal tech ecosystem. I fell in love with VC and the Canadian tech ecosystem by doing this. And 7 years later, I'm still around. So I used to call myself a newcomer, but now I would say I'm probably mid-career in the Montreal tech ecosystem, and very glad to be joining this project. I think through the pandemic, a lot of the ecosystem kind of became a bit on pause, and now I really feel this energy of the OG Montreal tech ecosystem coming back together. And I think having good, I would say uncensored content coming from the community is one of the magic of Montreal. So very glad to be part of this project.
Yeah, I like the choice words of OG. We have a few OGs here. Maybe so, Gab.
Yeah, I would include Eleanor in the OG category. So hey everyone, glad to be here. Gabriel Sundaram. I'm currently one of the founders of a startup called Mission. Mission's a marketplace for software engineering talent where we help engineers connect with work opportunities, but we've also built software to help engineers understand how to level up in their careers. Before Mission, I was COO and part of the founding team at Bus.com, where I was leading product and growth. And before Bus.com, I spent a long period of time where I met Eleonore and Ian at Real Ventures. So as part of the founding investment team at Real Ventures, very active in FounderFuel, which we'll talk about today. And that's where I connected with Ian and a bunch of people in the ecosystem. During my time at Real, got very involved in a lot of the startup community work that was happening, including Startup Open House, Startup Drinks, and Ian and I, with one of our good friends, Joey Zick, started a tech blog called MTL in Tech, which was everything about what was happening in Montreal related to the startup and tech ecosystem. And so have always been a big fan of kind of shining a light on what's happening in Montreal and in Canada related to tech.
I guess that means I'm next.
That's you.
Well, hi, everyone. My name is Ian Jeffrey. I have been an entrepreneur since I was 12 years old, but started more in the tech environment back in 2006 when I was 28 years old. I started my first ventures in tech back in San Francisco. I was there for 4 years. And I've left Montreal twice. One was after school to go snowboarding and do the ski bum thing in Whistler. The second time was to go to the Valley and build that tech venture. And Montreal just has this pull and pulled me back both times. Montreal for me is really home. And I take a lot of pride in showing the world that we can build great tech businesses out of Montreal. And so that was that is one of the reasons why I'm getting involved in TechPoutine. Back in 2011, when I came back to Montreal, I quickly met up with the guys at Real Ventures who were looking to build a startup accelerator in Montreal. Fell in love with the idea and worked very, very closely with John Stokes, one of the partners at Real, to launch FounderFuel. And so I launched that. And there again, one of my big drivers was to create and contribute to the Montreal ecosystem and show the world that we can build great businesses here. So did that for 3 years, and through my time at Real Ventures, obviously spent a lot of time with Gabriel, and we launched Montreal in Tech, which is the blog that he was talking about. And this, to me, TechPoutine is the next evolution of this journey of mine to sort of promote Montreal and share with the world what we're doing here. Right, we've got great talent, great investors, all kinds of great reasons to build a business in Montreal, and that's the motivator for me with TechPoutine. And most recently, launched my last venture in 2018, which is a company that was called Breathe Life, which we exited to Zinnia, based out of New York City. We exited that company in 2022. So I feel like I've seen a lot of different sides to the coin. I've been an investor, both institutional investor, angel investor, entrepreneur in tech, entrepreneur not in tech, and I guess like a advocate of the community. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'm really excited to see where TechPoutine goes, and what we can do with this new project.
Yeah, maybe to finish things off, I think those are great intros, guys. On my end, the TechPoutine, I think maybe start with the why we're doing this. I think it's just something that I love promoting the community, and obviously I think I've had you all on my other podcast that I used to have to basically talk about the ecosystem. So it's been a joy to be able to meet smart people and learn from them. So a pretty good hack and shine a light on the work that's being done here. And I think that's kind of the overarching goal. A little bit of my background, was in between jobs for a while. So like I founded a consultancy called PNR that I just left. Before that I worked at Google, and then prior to that worked in the digital marketing world. So I was like a geek, like really good in Excel earlier in my career, and just formed a new venture capital firm called Amiral Ventures. So really excited for the new journey. Like first time professional, I'll be a professional investor. I've done a lot of angel investing, notably with Ian's startup, Breathe Life. So I've learned it a little bit as a hobby, but excited to do this now kind of full time. And then selfishly, yeah, I think this project also for me is going to be a great way to just like continue collaborating with these three folks on the call. And maybe to talk about the podcast just for a second, if you guys have any insights to share as to like the rationale, the why you're interested in doing it. When I approached you guys, like, well, what made you say yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Ian touched on, this concept of really shining a light on what's happening in Montreal and Canada in terms of the tech and startup ecosystem. I think what's interesting, a lot of us have been involved in organizations that act almost as a gateway to the startup and tech community. Eleonore with Front Row for university students, Ian and I through FounderFuel, but also through Notman House, which was very much a physical gateway to the startup and tech ecosystem. And so Montreal in Tech, MTL in Tech, and this podcast to me is a great way to create a digital kind of bridge between the world and the tech ecosystem. So I really like that concept of being able to allow more people to get exposure and connect with what's happening.
I agree. I think, to your credit, Nectar, as well, for me, and I know your previous podcast played a big role. Like way before I was even invited to be a guest on it, I listened to so many of your episodes, and I learned so much about people I had heard of and people I didn't know at all in the Montreal tech ecosystem through your podcast, and made great connection with folks just after listening to their episode and reaching out. So I think, having a great example of high quality Montreal produced content that does shed a light on exceptional people in our ecosystem and have real conversation about what's going on. Like you showed us it can be done. So I think having a group of people with different perspective to me was super attractive, and I hope we can do something that arrive à la cheville of what you've done previously in the podcast world.
Stop! I'm blushing. I'm
I,
blushing.
and I want to steal something that I heard from you, Gabriel, many, many, many times over when we were building Montreal in Tech. one of the things that you used to say, which I always thought was very clever, while we're giving each other compliments, here's a compliment for you. You used to say, that there's all kinds of things that happen in the community, but people don't know about them. It's like if you're at an event and you take pictures of the event, but those pictures aren't shared anywhere, no one knows the event happened. It just happened, right? And so part of the motivator here is there's a lot of great things happening in Montreal and Quebec and across Canada. And if there's no one telling the stories about them, then just no one's aware about it. And so I think part of this for me is definitely about creating that awareness, right? And not just on the startups, but all kinds of things that are happening in the community at large, making sure that people are aware of it.
Yeah, and just to play off on the podcast Nectar that you had before, I completely agree that hearing those stories from the perspective of Montreal, Quebec, Canadian entrepreneurs was really refreshing. It's not like there's a lot of great content that's out there in the world, and there's a lot of similarities in terms of the journey that entrepreneurs need to go through, whether it's in Montreal or in San Francisco or in New York. But just having that Montreal angle, having that Canadian angle to it, just gave it a slightly different perspective that I think was important to share. Because a lot of what you would hear on your podcast was similar, but it was just this unique angle. And I think there's stories that need to be told about what's happening locally as well.
Yeah. And I think it's maybe a great, conversation that we had as to like what should be the first, topic of TechPoutine, right? Where we're debating, and I think good timing. Considering we're recording on July 10th, like the day before demo day for FounderFuel, and it's like for me, like FounderFuel, it was the kind of like catalyzing event, right? Every year that really kind of helps spark a lot of we spoke about the word community. So I think it's great that we have people that were really at the ground floor. So Ian, you kind of alluded a little bit about, the history, back in 2011 with Real and John. Maybe give us a little bit brief oral history of a FounderFuel, like, from the earliest that you can remember.
Sure. So for me, it was I was on a journey back to Montreal after having spent 4 years in the Valley, and I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do. And somehow, through the grapevine, Patrick Lauzon introduced me to Mark McLeod. Mark was a partner at the time at Real Ventures, and I had a quick call with Mark, who quickly introduced me to John. And so I met up with John Stokes, and he talked about, as part of the Real Venture strategy, wanting to build a startup accelerator, loosely built along the same lines of Y Combinator or Techstars, which at the time were the only two accelerators around. And he and I spoke for quite some time before I said, I want to do this. But effectively, remember we had coffee and our dinner last week. John and I were talking about this. We were remembering the old stories because FounderFuel coming up tomorrow. But it was May 2011 that I started my first day, and a month later we had built a website. We had assembled about 100 different mentors from all different categories, whether it was investors, entrepreneurs, or senior executives at different influential companies. And we were up on TechCrunch. So within a month time, we pulled all of that together and we started recruiting. And the concept, I think everyone is pretty familiar with it, but the concept was bring 10 companies in and invest a small amount of capital and surround them with the types of individuals that can help them accelerate. And sometimes that acceleration is accelerating the failure, and sometimes it's accelerating the success, right? And both are fine. But coming out of this program, which was a 12-week program, every individual would be, a changed, transformed individual because of the experience that they went through collectively. Similar to, when you think of going to Harvard Business School and you have this collective of individuals who had like the same sort of intense programming. And FounderFuel is certainly not school at all, but you're all going through this similar type of program. And as you know, it culminates at the end with Demo Day. And Demo Day has had many different incarnations over the years, but certainly it certainly is one thing. It's definitely showcasing the quality of the companies that participate in that particular cohort. And it's meant to be a launch pad to help raise venture capital as a next step. And some of the funny stories, before we launched FounderFuel, we went to Demo Day in New York City of Techstars New York. And I remember John, as he does, he looks at me while we're looking at the companies and he says, "You realize you got to make FounderFuel Demo Day at least better than this, right?" And we talked about this last week, and I think we knocked it out of the park, right? It was I think we hit the ground with a splash. There was 1,000 people at Monument National, and I don't think there had been an event of that size in Montreal in a long time, if ever. I'm quite proud of that, and just sort of jumping. Go
I
ahead.
don't think Ian will take credit for it, but I think Ian helped set the standard for what a demo day could be in Montreal and even outside of Montreal. I went to a couple of the early demo days of some of the other accelerators, and they felt more like a high school like grand assembly where the principal was giving a talk versus a show. And Ian really did an amazing job, I think, creating a really fun experience that gave a great stage for the companies to present themselves. And so and you see that kind of replicated in a lot of other demo days that we have in the city. People in Montreal kind of take it for granted that that's what a demo day should be. But trust me, that's not what demo days look like before FounderFuel.
Well,
None that I've seen.
I have really high expectations for next week because I saw Katie on Friday, and I'm like, okay, I think the production level, Katie, obviously the new GM of FounderFuel, I think the production level is going to be cranked up a notch tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to it because she does all the TEDx in Montreal. She has a lot of experience, and I think it's going to be really exceptional. Can't wait. But thanks for the
Yeah, I
kudos.
mean, not to say that the show is the most important part of the accelerator program, but definitely creating a fun, entertaining event helps bring out more people, which allows for more connections, which gives more exposure to the companies. And so I think it's an important part of what made FounderFuel special. And not a lot of people talk about that, but a lot of people focus on what happened to the companies that have gone through the program. But it's very difficult to measure the impact that it has just through the connections that happen through the event itself, through the program itself, through Mentor Day, which is a day where 100 plus mentors come together to work with the companies. A lot of important connections and relationships are built because of those opportunities to get together. I don't know, actually,
Yeah.
Ian, if we ever talked about it, but I mentioned before I was part of the founding team at Bus.com. I met the founders of Bus.com at Demo Day, the Demo Day prior to them being in the program. And I was introduced through one of the founders that went through FounderFuel, Brandon from Tattoo Hero, to Kyle and Wolf at Demo Day. And the funny thing is, at that demo day, the next demo day when they presented, their CTO, who was part of the founding team, was in the audience listening to them pitch. And it was because of demo day and that exposure that they were able to connect. And so you can never really, you never are able to really know what the first order, second order, third order impacts of these events are. But when you bring so many great people together, magic happens.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say, right? People measure the success of Demo Day on the companies presenting, but that's not at all the only indicator of success, right? There are so many of those stories of, whether it's, people, I mean, even you joining Bus.com, right? That never would have happened if it hadn't been through Demo Day effectively, right? And so there's a lot of connections that happen. There's a lot of people who go there who are intrigued as what is it to be an entrepreneur? What can it be? And sort of meet people. And so there are other functions to the event that are not often talked about. But of course, one of them being, exposing the companies. But it really is about assembling the community and getting them all thinking about early stage startups, which is exactly what we want, right? Because if every investor is thinking early stage, if every banker is, lawyer, you name it, tax person, like we need all these people thinking about early stage startups if we're going to make Montreal what we want it to be, which is a great place to build a company.
I really think it was through FounderFuel and Demo Day that a lot of the industry partners started to get systemically involved with the startup ecosystem, like BDO and Faskin and all of these groups. And so definitely, creating that net, that wider exposure has had a lot of impact for all companies, not just the companies presenting.
I'd be curious. First of all, guys, super interesting, like history. Like I've learned already quite a few things. I'd be curious to poke Eleanor, like from front row, when you were at front row. Like, how much did FounderFuel influence you, influence how you thought about front row while you were there?
That's a good question, and actually got a Facebook memory notification this morning from FounderFuel, July 10th, 2018, where we
No
had our
way.
first French Ventures company who pitched in vivo. I'm rocking the t-shirt. Anyone who's obviously listening audio can see this, but it was such a big deal for us because it was a company that formed through French Ventures. Two students who were there to learn about being a venture capital associate and invest in other students. They really geeked out, and we had to basically kick them out of Frontier Venture so we could invest in their company. And then, right away, the folks at Real Ventures flagged them and invited them to apply for FounderFuel, and they did. And that was a really interesting experience. And even, for me personally, we were all there, the Brightspark team, watching Demo Day. And obviously this like super pre-seed company is way too early for a thesis. But then the partners at Brightspark see the pitch and they're like, wow, this is really interesting. And these guys, what do you think about them? And we ended up investing pre-seed in this company that would probably have never happened if, that was not for Demo Day. And we actually just sold this company this year. It was like my personal first exit as a VC and the first big one for Frontier
Congrats.
Ventures. And it's like seeing this picture this morning of the memory of like all the gang at Demo Day at FounderFuel was a really good memory to have. And we had a few companies from Frontier Ventures go through FounderFuel. And it was like, as we're talking about the general ecosystem and putting all the different players together, for us, FounderFuel was such a great next step of your student founder, you're building your company, get a small check from Frontier Ventures, then you graduate and you're like, okay, what's next? And then if you have a program like FounderFuel to help you figure out next step, and as you said, Ian, it can be an acceleration to figure out actually this is not a great idea, or maybe we should pivot, or maybe this is actually not the team I want to be spending time with for the next few years. But getting into a program like that where the entire ecosystem comes together is really a key part of Montreal. And personally, I really felt the void of having no FounderFuel for a few years. Just the Demo Day again, bringing like having such a large event where everyone comes together and catch up, and you create those little magic moments of people being in the same room and being inspired, I think was really key. And I'm really excited to see this. I think this year being the first year when you have also many investors coming together to back the program. I think it's something that is very typical of Montreal, of seeing different VC firms collaborate on a project. Same thing with Espace CDPQ. Every time I meet an investor from outside Canada and I tell them that all the VCs in Montreal are sitting in the same building and we share conference rooms, and they're like, what? Like, how can this work? But it works well in Montreal. And I think
Yeah.
having a program like FounderFuel supported by different early stage VC firm is a great highlight of something that's special about the community here and that we need to keep nurturing.
It's
Yeah,
the
I
first
think
time it
yeah.
comes to mind, but it's like CDPQ is like our version of Sandhill Road.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you don't even have to go outside. You just knock
Yeah,
from suite
exactly.
to suite, and you meet
Exactly.
everyone.
Yeah, I do think FounderFuel is a testament to how special it is for the Montreal ecosystem, because I don't think there are many things that you would get so many funds to participate together in. And so, as this year, as people may not know or may know, Inovia, Panache, and Real Ventures came together to launch FounderFuel as a joint initiative. And so, it's the first year that happened. In the past, it was only operated and funded completely by Real Ventures. And so it was really exciting, as you said, to see that these players came together from within the ecosystem. I think everybody has aligned interests, but in some ways, I mean, the venture game is a competitive game, and people are trying to get access to proprietary deal flow. And so it's nice to see that they all saw the value of FounderFuel and came together to do it.
Yeah, I think it's
Nectar, I got a question for you because you're asking all the questions. You got to tell us your FounderFuel experience.
Oh man, my first Founder Fuel experience. I should have looked up the name of the startup, but it was like on stage in front of like 800 people. You were like presenting, and like I was a mentor for a startup. They were building, and the name's
10
going to come to me.
scores.
Yes, thank you. They were building. Jesus, I should have not forgotten that. They were building like a basically like a an SEM optimization software. And back in the day, I was working at Google at the time, and so I knew a little bit about SEM. So and I was just mentoring them. And I remember being so frightened. It was at that Rialto. I remember which year it was, like 2012 or 2013, in front of so many people presenting, and it was just like it's like you're a rock star on that stage. Uh, the I guess
That is a beautiful hall.
Yeah, it was super nice. Yeah, super nice. But it's
Yeah.
also one of those things where like hindsight is 2020, right? It's like, of course, it's a successful event and like it makes sense to do it. But I imagine 2011 or 2012, it's like maybe not a sure thing to do, especially spending like funds from a venture capital firm, right? And I won't name names, but one person was very highly critical. I remember in the ecosystem, like, why is Real spending money on this, right? And I remember that it just creates so much external value, right? That's not captured by Real specifically or by a VC firm. So I'd love to guys hear you riff off a little bit on this concept of like this positive externality that's created as a result. You already mentioned quite a few examples, but I find it's really striking.
Yeah, it is one of these things that are difficult to measure. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on it just because a lot of the work that we did at Real Ventures was this type of work, that it was initiatives that wouldn't necessarily just help support Real Ventures, whether that was Notman House or some of the community initiatives that Real allowed me to invest time in pursuing. I think the partners at Real from the very beginning had a perspective that all boats will rise with the tide, and let's invest in the community, and that will help everyone, including Real Ventures. But for sure, when you break it down to fund IRR or TVPI or DVP, DPI, I'm looking at you, Eleonore, to make sure I have the right metrics.
Yep. DPI is definitely the most important one.
DPI. And so, that those community initiatives don't necessarily reflect in those metrics, which is unfortunate because I think it's not something that usually plays out in the short run. It's more of a long-term investment that Real made and a lot of ecosystem partners make.
Yeah, I think that, without, there's no need to really name funds or accounting firms or companies or any of those, but I firmly believe that some of those organizations that are having tremendous success today, through the flourishment of the call it the last 10 years of the startup ecosystem in Montreal, would not be in the same place had not been for some of these community driven initiatives, right? And that, like you said, Gabriel, is not tied to name the acronym DPI or whatever it is that is tied to that, such as job creations, company creations, just richness in general. Those are not things that are traditional metrics that we can track. So I think a lot happened in the last 10 years, and it's important that we recognize some of that work that was done early days to contribute to what we have today, and so many people are benefiting from it today. And one could wonder what would have happened if those things had not happened, right? We may not be in the same place.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not
I
just, I'd
agree.
say, FounderFuel. I think it's, Front Row, you could say Startup
Yeah.
Fest. There's a lot of initiatives, Notman House, that kind of fall in the same bucket where it's harder to fully grasp the impact that's been, created because of these initiatives directly within the fund that funded them. But it's definitely there when you try to connect the dots backwards. Someone should take the time
Hmm.
and try to map it out. I don't know who would benefit from that, or who would be motivated to do that exercise, but I think it would be a fun one to do.
Hmm. I agree. And I think part of, if we just focus on demo day, part of the like putting on a big show and having a big stage and doing something that has kind of that YC vibe and ambition also tells, I think, all every year will inspire a new generation of people who are maybe thinking about starting a company and like, what, I can do this. And here's Montreal, like, you gather hundreds of people, if not thousands, to listen to those entrepreneurs who are telling their story, their progress over the past 3 months and their failures. And I think that alone, in terms of inspiration, would be probably impossible to actually get metrics out. But is plays a really important role, and we need to keep doing it. Obviously, I think the Montreal ecosystem, if you look back the past decade, has evolved a ton, and we need, I think, equally to like, we need to talk about the big successes. We need to keep raising the bar, but we need that very early stage infrastructure of inspiring people to start company and putting them on the stage. I think that part, no matter how mature the ecosystem, like, that little early stage community magic needs to stay. And we're all accountable if we want this ecosystem to thrive, to contribute to it one way or another.
And you said, I can do this, and I would add, I can do this here, right? Not
Very
not
true.
so long ago, you had to leave, go find the money in the valley, right? It just was not accessible here, and obviously that has completely changed in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah. And the community definitely has evolved a lot from the first cohort that was launched. I'd say there's a lot more activity in the city. It Like a lot of cities with COVID, things died down a little bit, but it seems to be picking up strong. I think one thing that I'd love to see, and we were just talking about collaboration between Panache, Inovia, and Real Ventures with FounderFuel, I'd love to see even more collaboration. I think there's a lot more government money that's kind of flowing through the system now, and you see a lot of new programs that are being created. I think, Ian, that's one of the things that you did really well with FounderFuel. You never made it about one organization, and you let everyone who wanted to participate. I don't think it necessarily helps the ecosystem in Montreal or in Canada if we create a lot of small initiatives. I think if we get together and collaborate, we'll have way more impact than trying to start new things on the side and have multiple initiatives that are playing out. For the most part, what I've seen is most people are very open to collaborating, but I find people, I don't know if they're shy or if they want to do it their own way, or I'm not sure why it plays out the way it does. But I do find and see in Montreal and in Canada that there are several initiatives that are being created in parallel versus collaborating and having more impact.
Well, I think that's a great point, and I think that, at least in my experience, like for me, moving to the valley is what changed my mindset. Back when I moved over there, like I was of the mindset that, you know, I will eat your lunch and I will win, right? Like I will destroy my opponent, right? I'm exaggerating my point to make the point. And what I learned there is that it was a very collaborative ecosystem, and it was all about you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And this is something that I think if we aspire to have the ambitions, if we have the ambitions of being as material, as important as somewhere like the Valley or New York City, like it's a lot more collaborative than we have in our cultural sort of upbringing, I guess I would say. in the Quebec ecosystem, right? And there are great examples of celebrities that were popular in Quebec, and as soon as they become popular somewhere else, well, they're a sellout and they're this and they're that. Like, there's all these types of things that are very Quebec focused, which are actually detrimental to the creation of a great startup environment, which it's changed a lot, but it's not changing as much, and I think that as quickly as it should. And I think that's a great example of you know um, of how things should change. Like, I'll name a fund which I thought was very interesting when they launched. When Luge launched, right, there's a lot of financial institutions that got together and backed this group of individuals and said, we're going to try to transform the fintech. I mean, that to me, as far as I know, maybe there's other examples of that, but like multiple banks, multiple insurance companies getting together to try to reinvent like, that is real collaboration, right? And it's not about I'm a better bank if I destroy the other bank. It's about, like you said before, what's the expression? All boats rise if you collaborate.
Yeah.
So I think that is something that still needs to happen in Quebec. And yes, I intentionally, when I launched FounderFuel, did it in a way that any bank that wanted to be involved, any law firm that wanted to be involved, could be involved, because what it did was get everyone thinking about early stage startups.
Yeah. What's the
Yeah,
expression? If
I
you
don't
want to go
know.
fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And really love the
Yeah.
point that you guys brought up. Like, the rising tide floats all boats. And I think it's something that's maybe
Mhm.
still a little bit lacking. Like, we're all alluding to it's improving,
Mhm.
but maybe not as much. And I think tomorrow's edition proves that, hey, there are other investment funds that are also participating with Inovia and Panache. But if we
Mhm.
want to raise the quality of the ecosystem, it's not about me. It's really about we, essentially. And I really like that approach. It's like, I have good
Yeah.
I think one of the questions I had was like, how do we make it better? How can we do like classic
Mhm.
10x, right? And I think you guys are
Yeah.
hitting on something that's very interesting, right? And I think, Eleanor, you
Yeah.
brought it up as well
But
before with front row and what you experienced.
one thing I just want to add on top of it, I'm sure, Eleonore, you heard this as well in terms of, probably from some of your colleagues at Front Row. I've heard from the ecosystem from some people that there was a time and a place where we had to invest in the early stage in Montreal, but we've done that. And we're now at a point where we don't have to continue to invest. I think that's completely wrong. I think if you go look at what's happening in New York, if you go look what's happening in the Valley, even if you go to Toronto, like, we're just getting started. And it's a really big mistake to slow down because we're not where we can be. And I know a lot people are looking backwards, and you see that a lot has happened from when we first started 10 years ago or 20 years ago, whenever, depends on what lens you're looking through. But we're really just at the beginnings of what's possible. And I think it's a really big mistake if we slow down and we stop investing in great initiatives like Knockman House, like Front Row, like Startup Fest. All of these initiatives are critical to the ecosystem. And I think we have to double down, if anything, not slow down.
I agree. And I think we're at a point now where, we're doing it for the ecosystem, but we're also starting to see the value that's being created and captured by the Montreal tech ecosystem. We're at a stage now where we have a few great examples of successes, and people who build their first company and then their second and then third and are creating wealth for employees, for investors. I think it still always starts with the early stage. And I think to your point, Gabe, it's about keeping the community there, the initiative alive, but not duplicating a bunch of initiatives so that everyone has their own little thing for early stage, but really putting all the effort and part of the capital together as well to support that super early stage ecosystem. And that, for that, you still need that growth mindset and seeing, it's not that I want the biggest part of the pie. Let's just grow this pie and all create value and wealth for the entire ecosystem down the line, and really truly believing that it will work out and that there is an even brighter future for the tech ecosystem here. If everyone shares that mindset, I think we'll just see more growth and more of the current and new initiative, but that will be supported by multiple players together instead of duplicating some of the efforts. Sometimes I think we saw in the past few years. Sometimes there's, as you mentioned earlier, there's a few example of initiative where it was a lot of the same and maybe not focus enough on the founders and really the value to the ecosystem. And I think now we're seeing that putting back together of sharing efforts to build a larger tech world for everyone.
You guys have all been around in the ecosystem for a long time. Do you agree with the statement that I'll say that I don't hear as often as I used to things like, oh, if only I was in San Francisco, I would raise capital. If only I was, in New York City, I'd find a CTO easily. If only I was, named a geography. Like it was all about, they were blaming the ecosystem for their struggles as opposed to and thinking it would be easier elsewhere than actually, just getting it done here. Do you agree that you don't hear that as much, or did you ever hear that?
Nectar, you want to go, or Eleanor?
I find I'm hearing a lot less. Obviously, like I'm wearing the new hat. Like I think I announced today that I'm moving into the world of venture capital. So it's like I have a little bit of rose-colored glasses that we don't need other places, and we could we're great here. But I still think it's the case, right? Like in the research, actually, in our pitch decks, we're seeing the majority of Series A, Series B investments still led by foreign VCs. So I don't think it's perfect. It's gotten probably much better because if you think back to like 2007, 2008, there was no tech ecosystem, right? And it was launched a lot by, what's expression standing on the shoulder of giants essentially today, but still a lot of work to do. But to your point, Ian, I think it's less of a gripe. I think if you're a founder, it's less of a gripe today than it was in the past.
Mm-hmm. I think as an investor, we still hear a lot like, oh, yeah, we tried raising in Canada, but no one got it. So we raised from the US. And sometimes on the talent side, and it's true, like, if we stay on capital, like there's less capital here and less mature firms and probably more firms that are built in a way that's a bit probably more risk averse than what you see in the US. I think that is still like those, if you look at the numbers, those are facts. Like we are a much smaller ecosystem still. Same thing with the talent. Like now we're getting to a generation of people that if you want someone who has been doing marketing for a D2C company, you'll find a few in Canada, but much less than in the US. But the way the world works, especially with the pandemic, I think you can raise from a great investor syndicate of a local investor and US investor that will work very well together, and you can build a team that works on a hybrid level and hire everywhere. So personally, I always, if you use the fact that you're basically as an excuse for not doing something, I call bullshit on that. But it's true that there's still some disparity in the ecosystem, and I think we just personally as a Canadian VC, I try to always put the bar higher for myself and make sure that we do not get stuck in some of the things that are often blamed on Canadian investors and keep being more ambitious. We tell our entrepreneurs to be more ambitious. I think we should do that as well as VC firms locally.
Yeah. I think that's maybe a great way to wrap it up, guys. I think it's great, a great conversation around FounderFuel's history. We'll see. Like we have to figure out if we're doing an episode 2. So like maybe we'll ask the audience if people like this. Do we do this again? It'll be a big question.
Good.
It still feels like we have a lot to
flowers at us.
Yeah, it feels like we still have a lot to talk about. So
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if we would have enough content to get through for the hour, but it seems like there's a lot to talk about.
That's it. So yeah, on behalf of, I guess, Eleanor, Gabriel, and Ian, I just want to thank everyone, and thanks for listening.